and welcome back to Daytime Stories with Jeri. That's me. And as you guys already know, I love books. I love travel, I love culture, I love learning new things. And today I want to share a book with you called Meanwhile Back at the Ranch. Now this is a really cool book. It's about Texas. But before we get to reading, you need to know a couple things about Texas. There's some cool things that they just like to say in Texas, like everything's bigger in Texas. That's almost true. You'll see that today in our story. And then also, they like to say, don't mess with Texas. You see it plastered everywhere along the highway. When you travel through there, you're gonna see it. It's pretty great. Texas is a great place to be. It's a fun place to be, and the people are really gracious and nice. The last thing that you will find is that when people move there, they always say, I wasn't born here, but I got here as quick as I could. And today you're gonna see those things here in our book, Meanwhile Back at the Ranch, by Annie Isaacs, illustrated by Kevin Hawkes. For all of you that love books, you will know that the author is who writes the books, the illustrator is who draws the pictures. So today we have an author and an illustrator working together to bring us this awesome story. And if you see right here, there's a little barcode. We got this one at the library. To those who read this tale, notice is hereby given. Under full penalty of the law, exaggeration is forbidden in the state of Texas. No Texan may decorate a plain fact except if that person is an elected official or anyone who has ever ridden a horse. In such cases, all exaggeration must be restricted to the first 24 hours past sunrise. On the 4th of July, 1870, the widow Tulip Jones of Greater Boar, England, inherited $35 million and a ranch at By Golly Gully, Texas. She moved there at once. She brought 2 trunks of tea and her 12 pet tortoises, January, February, March, and so on, in order of age down to little December, who was not much bigger than a period at the end of this sentence. 3 servants came along as ranch hands, Lindsay, Woolsey, and Calico. They arrived in the middle of the hottest summer Texas had ever known. But By Golly Gully was so hot that the chickens laid hard-boiled eggs and the lizards hobbled around on tiny stilts to avoid burning their feet on the ground. Grab your hoses, said Tulip Jones. We're going to plant a garden. She soon found that everything raised on Texas soil grows faster, bigger, and better than anywhere else. Lindsay, Woolsey, and Calico had to climb a ladder to pick tomatoes. Potatoes got so big it took only 7 of them to make a dozen. A single watermelon fed everyone on the ranch for a month. Afterwards, they used the hollow rind as a hay shed. Not surprisingly, Widow Jones' tortoises also grew to amazing proportions. Within a month, even little December measured 6 feet from his tail to his nose. Now you might think their size would slow them down, but facts are otherwise. The bigger those tortoises grew, the faster they ran, until eventually they could out-gallop any racehorse. A tortoise can do whatever a horse can do, only better, declared Tulip Jones proudly. She ordered saddles and reins and rode her pets all over the prairie. This peaceful life suits me just fine, Widow Jones would say, while she and her ranch hands drank tea and gazed at the summer sky. But it didn't stay peaceful for very long. For word spread as fast as prairie wind that a widow with $35 million had settled on By Golly Ranch. Soon, every unmarried man in Texas hoped to marry Tulip Jones. And in 1870, every man in Texas was unmarried. Before long, a line of suitors stretched from By Golly Ranch to the town of Toad Crossing, a mile down the road. With 1,000 men dropping by for tea every day, Widow Jones had to hire Charlie Dough Puncher, a baker from Abilene, to bake tea cakes, biscuits, cookies, and pies. Each night, after all the suitors had left, Tulip Jones would sit in the kitchen and complain to Charlie while he mixed the next day's bread and muffins. "That tumbleweed Thompson is so clumsy he couldn't hit the ground with his lasso," she told Charlie one night. "And Big Toe Anderson has nothing on his mind but his hat." "Try this," Charlie said. He offered her a blueberry scone fresh out of the oven. I'm not looking for a husband," Widow Jones explained one suitor after another. "I like it fine on my own." Still, the men kept coming and coming. But when Sheriff Arroyo and his brother Spit showed up, all the other suitors stepped back to let them pass. The Arroyo brothers were leaders of the infamous Hole in the Pants gang, who had been terrorizing ranchers and stealing cattle for years. Because the sheriff ran the gang, it didn't seem likely they would ever be brought to justice. Oh my goodness, look at his teeth right there. Sheriff and Spit Arroyo marched up to Widow Jones with grins as wide as their hats, determined to make her marry one of them. They didn't care which one, for they all planned to grab her money and run off to Mexico without her the minute the wedding was over. You'd be the safest lady in Texas if you married me," Sheriff Arroyo lied. "Reciprocus," said Spit. Tulip Jones recoiled in horror. Ooh. "Those Arroyos are so mean. Dynamite would hide from them," she told Charlie Dough Puncher that night while he frosted ginger snaps. Charlie set a pile of cookies before the widow. "Try this," he said, his kind face wrinkling with concern. "I don't think I can stand another day of these suitors," Charlie said to Tulip Jones. "I've got to find a way to get rid of them." All that night she paced across the porch, munching on Charlie's cookies and thinking. By the time the sun rose, she had a plan. "Girls, this is the last day you'll have to wash dishes for 1,000 men," she told her ranch hands at breakfast. "I'm going to rid us of these suitors for good." "Hooray!" shouted Lindsay, Woolsey, and Calico. "I'll give the suitors a task and promise to marry the man who succeeds," Widow Jones explained. "But it'll be an impossible task," she added gleefully, "so everyone will fail." "But what if someone should succeed?" asked Calico. "Succeed?" Tulip Jones snorted in disgust. "Those men are so weak they couldn't lift their own shadows." Still, the ranch hands weren't convinced. "We won't have any peace at this ranch until Widow Jones gets married," Lindsay said as she washed teacups. "Or until all 1,000 cowboys gets married," added Woolsey as she dried the cups. "If only we could find 1,000 brides for them, fast." "Maybe we can," said Calico with a sly grin as she set clean cups on the shelf. "I've got an idea." Later that day, the Pony Express carried a notice from By Golly Ranch to be printed in every newspaper in America. "Brides wanted, 1,000 cowboys available, free to good homes. Lorate and hat included, all guaranteed purebred Texans. Limited offer, act fast, reply to By Golly Ranch, Texas." Meanwhile, back at By Golly Ranch, Widow Jones denounced her challenge. "I'll marry the man who can make the Rio Grande River flow backwards." 950 men gave up on the spot and left the ranch, but the rest were undaunted. Within an hour, 50 suitors set out for the Rio Grande River. "This ranch will be a heap quieter from now on," Tulip Jones told Charlie Dough Puncher cheerfully. "Try this," Charlie replied with a smile as he pulled a blueberry tart from the oven. But before the day was out, to the astonishment of Widow Jones, 4 men succeeded in making the Rio Grande flow backwards. Big Toe Anderson piled sand in the shallowest tributary to make the dam, The water rose and rose on the upper riverside until it started to push itself backwards. Tumbleweed Thompson bought every loaf of bread in Texas and lured 10 million ducks downstream with the breadcrumbs. As 20 million ducks' webbed feet paddled hard against the current, they slowed the mighty river and stopped it, and finally pushed it backwards. Spit and Sheriff Arroyo found an easier solution. They dug a small ditch next to the river and diverted a trickle of water into it, flowing in the opposite direction. You didn't say how much had to flow backwards, the sheriff reminded Widow Jones, and she had to admit this was true. Guess I need another task, the widow said, fighting discouragement. She thought quickly and handed each man a pail, saying, I'll marry the man who can fill this with stars. Night was falling as the 4 suitors rode off. Meanwhile, in cities and towns all over America, 1,000 hopeful brides-to-be sewed wedding gowns and veils and boarded trains bound for Texas. The next morning, the Arroyo brothers returned to By Golly Ranch alone. Each held a pail filled with small rocks. Caught ourselves some shooting stars, Whittler, called Sheriff Arroyo. You can't prove those rocks fell from the sky, protested Widow Jones. You can't prove they didn't, replied the sheriff. Reciprocus, shouted Spit. Once again, Widow Jones had to give in. Help me, Charlie, she cried, racing into the kitchen. I need another task, fast. And this time, it has to truly be impossible. Try this, said Charlie, showing her the front page of that morning's Abilene Gazette. Hole in the Pants gang still at large. President Grant says catching gang is challenge of the century. Why, Charlie, what a wonderful idea, said Tulip Jones. She ran back outside and announced, I'll marry the man who puts every one of the Hole in the Pants gang in jail. Sheriff and Spit Arroyo's jaws dropped so wide that several young bats mistook their mouths for caves and flew in to hang upside down on their teeth. Every last one, sputtered Sheriff Arroyo, choking on bats. Reciprocus, shouted Spit. He howled with laughter, and the sound was so bone-chilling that the coyotes all over Texas covered their ears. At that, the Arroyo brothers rode off, and for the rest of the night, Tulip Jones paced across her porch, sharing her worries with Charlie. Those sneaky Arroyo brothers are bound to come up with some kind of trick, she said. Oh, what can I do? Charlie offered plenty of strawberry shortcake and sympathy, but neither he nor Tulip Jones got a wink of sleep that night. Meanwhile, at the Abilene station, 1,000 brides got off the train and marched to By Golly Ranch. Their white gowns and long white veils blew out behind them. Is it snowing, or am I seeing ghosts? Widow Jones asked her ranch hands the next morning as the brides appeared on the horizon. Ma'am, I can't explain, said Lindsay, and told her about the newspaper notice. Thank you, girls. You've given me a splendid idea, said Tulip Jones. Saddle up the tortoises, she added as she ran over to welcome the brides. We're all going for a ride. Minutes later, the tortoises galloped out of By Golly Ranch with 1,000 brides on their back, while Widow Jones shouted instructions. Take out your needles and thread, ladies. In Dungaree Canyon, the Hole in the Pants gang were fast asleep when Widow Jones and the 1,000 brides showed up. On the way there, the women had stitched together their wedding veils to make a 5-mile-long net. The moment they arrived, they raced along the cliff's edge, dragging the huge net over the Dungaree Canyon and sealing off every possible path of escape. When Sheriff Arroyo, Spit, and the gang woke up, they found themselves surrounded. Don't make us get married, the gang begged, trembling in terror. They burst into tears. Throw us in a swamp with alligators. Make us eat lizard guts. We'll even take a bath. Only don't make us get married. "Reciprocus," sobbed Spit-a-Royo. "We'll do anything you ask," pleaded the sheriff, and more desperate than a coyote that just swallowed a cactus. "Anything." "Anything?" said Widow Jones with a grin. Later that day at the Toad Crossing jail, Sheriff Arroyo, Spit, and every member of the gang raced into jail cells. Widow Jones cheerfully locked them in and telegraphed the governor to send a new sheriff to Toad Crossing and a justice of the peace to By Golly Ranch. "Wedding at By Golly Ranch tonight," she telegraphed. "Everyone in Texas is invited." Meanwhile, Lindsay, Woolsey, and Calico raced from the ranch to ranch all across Texas, telling cowboys that 1,000 brides were waiting for them at By Golly Ranch. Meanwhile, back at By Golly Ranch, Charlie Dough Puncher poured 7,000 eggs, 10,000 gallons of milk, 200 lemons, 1 ton of butter, 2 tons of sugar, 40 pails of baking powder, and 4,000 pounds of flour into a mile-wide crater and mixed the batter by paddling around in a canoe. Then he left the cake to bake in the Texas sun. It rose and rose until the top climbed up out of the sight above the clouds. It was impossible to move the cake, so as soon as the justice of the peace had married them all 2,000 newlyweds grabbed forks and gobbled the cake from bottom to top until every last crumb was gone. That's a big cake. While everything settled on the land like a purple wedding veil, the newlyweds thanked Widow Jones one by one and rode off from By Golly Ranch. Lindsay, Woolsey, and Calico left too, for the 3 ranch hands had caught Marion fever and found husbands of their own. It was midnight when the last couple had left, and Tulip Jones went into the kitchen for her nightly talk with Charlie Dough Puncher. But Charlie wasn't there. Tulip Jones ran all over the ranch searching, but he wasn't anywhere. "I should have thought about this," the widow told herself sadly. "With the suitors gone, he must have figured I'd have no more need of him." In the hall, the grandfather clock ticked. Far off, a coyote pack howled its song, and the melody went riding up and down the hills. "But I do need him," Tulip Jones declared. Tears came to her eyes. Suddenly, she heard a wagon and saw a lantern swinging from the top rail. "Charlie," she cried, lifting up like a firefly. She ran out to meet him. "I'm so glad to see you." "Try this," Charlie said. He smiled as he handed her a small box. Inside was a wedding ring. And back at the ranch, they lived happily ever after. The end. Back at the Ranch by Ann Isaacs, illustrated by Kevin Hawkes. If you like these books, she has more. You can go get them and you can learn more about Texas, the big things that they have there, and have lots of fun reading. Thanks for joining us today for story time. We hope that you'll subscribe and come back for another story next week.